All right. Oh, hi. How's Al doing?
Oh, he does like
Yeah? You feeling better?
I think he's feeling worse.
Oh, no. We are now in Jesus' trial, but we got to get through, for some reason, the most important thing, and also the thing that had to be repeated for some reason, I don't know why it had to be repeated, but the thing that John wanted to repeat was Peter's denial. We see it in the other Gospels, and, this is not really, I'm not sure exactly what this represents historically, and I think we should look at it historically. Peter wasn't the perfect guy, and we're going to even find out that John didn't think he was very perfect at all. Paul didn't think he was very perfect, and we know Paul had issues himself, but, Peter really seemed to have, almost schizophrenic love-hate relationship with what he should do and what he shouldn't do. I think Cornelius is one of the most beautiful examples. It took an angel coming to him, 2 times or whatever, beating him down for him to finally listen to what God told him to do. And you go, did you have to get swallowed by a whale? But Peter's denial, for some reason really triggered, or John thought this was so important that he needed to repeat it again. And we get details of it. I really want to downplay this whole incident more as a marker in time rather than John going after Peter again, because we look at it as a positive, and it really shouldn't. When we finally get to chapter 21, I think, where you get the Jesus confronting Peter, it's a really huge, important part, especially in language use. But here, I see this more as a marker of the incident and the historical time. That is, Peter's denial, sits here. And I don't think John is so much accentuating his denial as putting it within the perspective of what else. Because the what else was, the description of the arrest, the description of Annas in his court in the trial. And then we don't get much of Caiaphas, but we're going to see that. So here is, the continuance of this, right? This is new information that he gives us. So in the NIV it says, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him in the garden? So this guy was there. I think, again, the extra information we're getting is it. And so we'll see it in the Greek. But one of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off, saith, did not I see thee in the garden with him? Makes a logical argument, one from out or among the slaves, not servants, slaves of the high priest, of the same family, together offspring. I think the Greek is so cool, they're genes, they're the same genes, so basically. So together offspring, he being of whom it amputated, cut off Peter, the one of the ears, the lobe of the ear, no or not, you saw into the garden in company with him, of him. One makes a logical argument out from among the slaves of the high priest, of the same family, he being of whom Peter amputated, cut off one of the ears. I saw you not into the garden in company with him. Didn't I see you in company with him? So, as I said, I think this is a marker to more of the story, right? And I also think that it's possible that this could have been a witness. So, as we, we just think of I think we really think wrongly about this. We should think of these things as historical, completely historical. In other words, these aren't automations, they're not cartoon characters, they're not actors, right? It's not like The Chosen where you have actors who are acting out a part. You have real human beings that saw all these things. So this guy, his importance isn't that he's necessarily a slave of the high priest. He's really not important because he was a kinsman whose ear Peter cut off. What's important is he was in the garden, saw Jesus Christ, and he happened to be related to the guy, the slave, the high priest, important slave called king, and a slave of the high priest. Do you see this? So if you were to account this guy, right? Let's say he came and visited your church, right? How did you know Jesus? I was in the garden with him. My cousin had his earlobe cut off by Peter. And here's Peter. Yeah. I kind of cut off his earlobe, right? Can you see this? I mean, I think this is marking the witnesses. And I believe that these people may have been alive and even giving a testimony of the time. And by the way, if they are giving a testimony, what does that prove about the gospel?
It's accurate.
Yeah, because you don't put negatives. If you're writing a religious tome, right?
Yeah.
Or even your own autobiography. I mean, some people do because they're narcissistic, crazy. They'll put in all this negative stuff about them. But sometimes you wonder, did you do that because you just wanted to bring attention to yourself, right? But we will see much more than that. How negative has this been to the disciples and the apostles?
Negative. I mean, he cuts off a guy's ear, they run away. I don't know. It's kind of not a great story. Yeah, no. It's
And the other gospels, right?
Yeah, it's not. They didn't keep Jesus from being arrested. It's kind of not a very good look.
Well, and I'll even go further back. Remember, we have like 4 chapters of Jesus's exposition to the apostles, to the disciples, about how they weren't doing what they were supposed to do and how they should, right? 4 chapters worth. In the other gospels, you don't get none of that. We get, the Lord's Supper, love you, let's go, guys, right? But in John, we get 4 chapters of Jesus pounding them and pounding us. I think that's, look, you don't write that stuff if you want a happy nice, right? You don't write things that are self-critical or things that are critical of your followers or leadership. That's just unheard of, right? What that does is it shows its history. That's a proof text. You have a comment? Yeah.
It also illustrates when the Holy Spirit came on them, how it had changed them so well. It really illustrates that point strongly.
I think to a degree, because, that's what I was saying about Peter. I think Paul had issues, and he knew he had issues. Barnabas and Mark, or whoever, the other guy he was with, also knew his issues. That's why they got Paul out of town all the time, because he couldn't keep his mouth shut, right? He's that guy that goes in and says the things that, no, don't say that, right? Because the people are going to throw stones at you and us too. So please, no, don't, right? Peter's the same way. You see it? We'll see this more as we get in, because I think John is, I don't know if John and Peter had a love-hate relationship, had a hate-hate relationship, or a love-love relationship. Love, you love your brother so much you tell the truth. Hate, you dislike him so much you tell the truth. Love-hate, maybe you hide it, right? I don't know. But we're going to see more of that. And, especially I don't really think he's pounding on Peter so much as he is marking this in time. That we now know these new witnesses to Christ, to the events. And then again, it says, again, Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. You notice that this is very short, even in Greek. Peter then denied again, immediately the cock crew. Anew, certainly accordingly, he denied, hence contradicts, refused to affirm or confess. Disowned, Petros, Peter, and directly at once a cock, phonesen, emitted a sound. Don't forget this word, we're going to see it again. Accordingly, anew, Peter denied, and directly a cock emitted a sound. Bingo, bango, bongo. But like I said, you notice that John pretty much collapses the narrative. It's even shorter narrative than the other Gospels. I didn't give them to compare it, but you can compare it yourself. But it's more detailed, but it's not nearly as dramatic, I don't think. I think it's a little different. So in this case, he's telling us the rest of the story. So then, in the NIV, then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. There are some really cool details in the Greek on this. Look how long this is. We're going to start getting these really long Greek passages that we turn into single sentences, which are kind of interesting. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but they might eat the Passover. They are leading, certainly accordingly, to Jesus away from Caiaphas, to or into the praetorium, or governor's courtroom. And this is from the definition in the Vines, sometimes including the whole edifice and camp. It was but early in the morning at dawn, and they, know or not, came or went into or into the praetorium, etc., in order that not or least they should be stained. They should be stained. Figuratively, to stain, defile the soul. Other things, phagosin, they might eat the Passover. This is a really interesting word, because what is baptism in Greek? To immerse. In other words, you are stained in immersion. Oh no. Well, in the mikvah, are you washed? No, the mikvah is not viewed as washing. It's abolition, but it's viewed as purifying the soul, right? But you are stained, dyed. This word, they should be stained, you can almost see this as an anti-baptism. Because the word would be, they would be, unclean, right? Unclean. Stained, though. Stained with sin? John throws in, or not throws in, John intentionally chooses these words to give us in the Greek. In the English, we get good old defiled, right? Defiled. Not exactly the same, but it's all right. Certainly, they're leading Jesus away from Caiaphas into the praetorium, or governor's courtroom. But it was early in the morning at dawn, and they went not into the praetorium, in order that they should not be stained. Contrariwise, they might eat the Passover. I think this is interesting. This is a Latin word. This is not a Greek word. It's a Latin word, praetorium, the governor's courtroom. And I wanted to give you a pic. Oh, here's that stain with diarrhea, to stain the soul, like when a sin taints by its polluting effects, moral, spiritual. Let's see, is there anything else that's worth looking at in there? This is interesting too. Oh, pictures, but I had a note here. You notice we get nothing about Caiaphas, but the narrative immediately moves to Pilate. This is an indicator of the audience and the work. The Greeks and Romans hearing this account would be very interested in what the Roman authority had to say, but less interested in the Jewish ideas. Plus, the other accounts tell us what we need to know about the high priest. In some degree, they are a joke to the Romans and the Greeks, because how can you have more than one high priest? I also mention this. Why do you think Caiaphas wanted to get rid of Jesus really fast? What's the last thing Annas did before he sent him to Caiaphas? And Jesus claimed that you struck me, not that you slapped me. If you slap, you're okay.
If you hit him with a closed fist.
If you strike, striking is punishable by death. So Jesus claimed that Annas had struck him, had him struck intentionally. So Caiaphas, what do you think they told Caiaphas? Well, think about this, okay? You think, now Caiaphas and Annas, are they buds?
No idea.
Father-in-law and son-in-law.
That doesn't necessarily mean you. But.
And competitors for high priest, right? You think Annas might want Caiaphas to be like gone? You think Caiaphas might want Annas to be gone? Because what would happen then? They get to be, maybe they get to be high priest more, or they, you know, and by the way, being high priest makes you wealthy, right? You got plenty of meat, you got lots of wealth, lots of stuff coming through the coffers. It's even better than USA, you know, USAID. You can scarf bunches of bucks off that biz. So, but you see how we get a really terse and short piece, and then we're going to get a very extended part. This is more about Pilate and Jesus than we get in any of the other Gospels, which I think is very important. Here's a picture, a pretty good one of the Jerusalem. I think this is relatively accurate. Yeah. Let's see. Don't let me forget to zoom. Oh, I didn't like that very much. Maybe we can get it more. Well, here's some of this is right, some of this is wrong. Well, actually, this is terrible. I thought I wanted the picture of the Antonia Fortress, and that's what I looked up for Google, and I thought I had it, but now they got this stuff. This is totally wrong, because Herod's palace is here. This is not where the Praetorium was. Praetorium was here, the fortress of Antonia, and Herod's fortress and palace, it wasn't a fortress and palace. It was in the upper city. This is kind of correct, but it's not the Essene quarter. This is the quarter of the Pharisees, Pharisaic quarter. And the Sadducees happen to live around there too. Here, okay, whatever. High priest Caiaphas' house. There's Annas. Anyway, the most important thing is this. That's what I want. That is correct and accurate. So, I don't know, I may need to recorrect this one or make some notes on it. Anyway, I thought that was a better one. This is what a Praetorium looks like. And this is, we don't know exactly what Praetorium in Jerusalem looked like because it's been destroyed. You know, they're not letting us cut down there. You got a real problem, right? They won't even let the Jews rebuild the temple or anything because that's where the Mosque of the Rock or the whatever, the Dome of the Rock is. that's a total imaginary thing. But anyway, this is what a praetorium looks like in general. This is the court. This has an entry this way, and this is the back rooms, and this is from a reconstruction. But generally, the praetoriums in this period of time were very similar. So this is kind of probably what it was like with an entry in this way here. I just wanted you to have an idea. So Pilate came out to them because they did not want to enter into the praetorium, right? Oh, yeah, I need to make it more bigger again.
You page width.
Yeah, I could do that, couldn't I? Or just move it.
147 is what it was.
Yeah. Boy, trying to get it exact, that'll work. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" This was, a lot of centurion covers this part, and also, what do you call it, brings together the other gospels, because a lot of people are confused. What I try to do in centurion is to put all the accounts together in a reasoned, logical, and time-based sequence, and I think I got them pretty close to exactly the way it would work in time, so everything fits. But Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation bring ye against this man?" He came or went out, certainly accordingly, the Pilatos, outside of doors, forward to them, and he made his thoughts known. Look at this. Facing. Most of the time you do a logic argument, right? A logos, make a logos, or you do a rotund, so you have a question for a person that's close to you, or to your rabbi, to your thing, or you have what's the one you ask? There's a question that you can way you can ask question. But in this case, it says he made his thoughts known. Of course, in English we say he said. Very interesting, right? He made his thoughts known. What? And look, Tina, that's no kidding question. What complaint you should carry or bear down of the man, of this man, of him? Accordingly, Pilate went outside the doors forward to them, and he made his thoughts known. What complaint should you bear down of this man? Beautiful. Do you see a huge difference here? Did they remember when Annas was talking to Jesus? Did he ask him any questions? No questions. There are no T forms. No T form. It wasn't a question. He made a direct accusation. Pilate's acting like what? Roman or Greek? He's asking no-kin questions. This is. Do you see this different? There's a huge difference culturally here. It's a huge difference. Where Annas was accusing Jesus in, bringing other witnesses, right? Brought other witnesses. And when Jesus spoke, what did they do? They slapped him. Basically told him to shut up. Pilate actually asked some questions. Very Greek, very Roman. And very interesting, too, because if you look at this Greek carefully, I wonder if I've got my comment here about it. Yeah, right here. In Greek, if you notice his words, even with our limited Greek understanding, don't his words seem kind of stiff and formal to you? Especially to the Jewish or to the Koine. His words are very stiff, very professional. They aren't smooth Greek. They are the words you would expect from a Roman governor. They're also ambiguous.
It's probably a little bit put out because he's the Roman governor, but he has to go outside to them because they think his area is too unclean for them to go into. That's kind of a slap.
They got him up early because this is night.
Well, it's just at the dawn, right?
Yeah.
And just at the dawn, Okay, this is some of the stuff we kind of forget about old Pilate. Pilate is he's not a legatus, but he is the Roman governor, right? Which means that usually the way you got there is you served in the Roman legions in some way, as in some leadership, probably as a legatus, which means you are the head of the legion, the political head of the legion. The legatus goes to the top centurion, who is the head of the legion, the guy who runs the legion, right? But the legatus is the guy who provides logistics. He gives the political, says, go and do this. He says, the governor told me to go do this. So he was probably a legatus. If you know anything about the legions, when do the legions get up? Really early, before dawn. They are dressed and ready to go. They are in their encampment, in their columns. When the dawn comes up and the centurions, and if they're not, what happens to them? You want to talk about a mad centurion? A mad centurion is one whose troops are not lined up, and the first guy is going to is the optio, and the optio is going to get knocked in the head a couple of times, maybe even put in chains. And next he'll go to the signifer, and then he'll go to the Surius, and then he'll beat the Labreus too. And then he'll make all his guys go on barley and probably run him into the ground literally in training exercises. Because you did not, the way the Roman legions worked was on discipline. Doesn't Pilate seem like a pretty disciplined guy? I think it's pretty interesting. But yeah, he had to come out. He's replying, he's ready to go. He is ready to go. His words are slightly ambiguous because look at what the words he actually asked. He says, what complaint should you bear down of this man? What complaint? It's not, he's asking an ambiguous kind of question. And also, the fact that Pilate comes out to them, what does that show?
Well, that was important enough for him to be involved.
Well, not just.
If it had been a lesser case or whatever, he would have like, forget it, I'm not doing that. Send it to whoever.
Well, if Pilate was really a nasty, bad leader, or really, what would you call it? What's that? Yeah, or tyrannical and dictatorial, right? He would have made them come into his court. Don't you think?
Unless he knew Pilate's always trying to keep things peaceful, right? So unless he knew what a fuss that would cause.
But I don't know that a tyrant would care. He would just hit him with the sword.
Remember where Pilate started. This is what I show in Centurion, that he changed radically. Because when he went to Caesar Maritima, what's the first thing he did going into Jerusalem? Do you remember? Josephus writes about it. It's in the Bible. It's in the New Testament.
Are you talking about the images?
Imagios. Yeah, he brought the imagios. Why did he bring the imagios into Jerusalem? What do you think? What do the imagios go with?
Is it the symbolism of the Roman Empire?
The imagios only move with the legion. So before Pilate went to Jerusalem, why did he send the imagios in? Well, he sent his legion. He sent probably in Centurion. I tell you that there were two cohorts. There were two cohorts of the legion. They usually put two cohorts in a city because the legions could not most cities could not accommodate a single legion. A single legion is 10 cohorts. So you ain't going to put no 10 cohorts into we're talking a battalion. We're talking about 500, 1,000 troops. You're just not going to do that and keep them, fed and everything, and in a place. So Pilate was sending two of his cohorts of one of his legions, the Frata. The Frata Legion was the main legion. It's one of the bull legions. It's one of what's his name? The Caesar Augustus's bulls. The legions of the bull. And the Imagios, he sent the Imagios with the legion into Jerusalem because it was to go in before he came in. And what did it cause in Caesar Maritima? You remember? Caesarea Maritima. What happened, according to the Bible? Josephus writes about it too. Yeah, there was a huge outcry from the people, so much that they said, Pilate sacrificed the Judeans on their own altars, which is really interesting. Because why would they have altars in Caesarea Maritima? Interesting, right? There's some really deep stuff in there, and that I think it's in Luke where they account that. But what is even more interesting is the same guy who basically who killed the protesting Israelites, Judeans in Caesarea Maritima. Now with Jesus, what is he doing? He's going out to them. Something changed radically between Pilate and that incident, and that was when he began his rule, to Pilate, who is now in Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. In my book, Centurion, I make it the centurion was the guy who advised Pilate and told him to basically how to moderate his stance so that he would get the support of the people. But whatever the reason is, Pilate was a wise enough ruler to realize that the techniques he probably used against maybe the Germanic tribes and the French did not work very well against these crazy, Judeans, Essenes, Pharisees, Sadducees, and Zealots, right? So he had to moderate, he had to do something. And this was the point. And look, even his point, his question, what complaint should you bear down of this man? He didn't say, what accusation do you bring against him? Or what should I try him for? Or what is, he says, what complaint should you bear down? It's an ambiguous term in Greek and even in English with our translation.
It's kind of belittling too.
It is.
He's saying, what are you grousing about? What are you, it's not like, what are the charges? It's, what are you complaining about?
And these guys get it. Look at the response. Now, the Greek's even better. If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. Now, I think the reason they handed him over is because Annas is getting itchy. Jesus made an accusation among a lot of people that he just struck him, right? And Caiaphas acknowledged that by sending him to the Roman governor. They were sending him to the Roman governor for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons, I think, is obvious. They wanted to get him out of the Jewish legal system really fast. Because under the Jewish legal system, what could the Sanhedrin say?
Could have flipped and gone against them instead of against Jesus.
Yep. I think that's really true. You notice we don't hear anything about the other Sanhedrin, right? It doesn't say Annas got together, and Caiaphas would have been part of the Sanhedrin. And almost all the Sanhedrin were Sadducees. Very few. There's 4 Pharisees that we know of. One of them was Gamaliel. Boy, they did not want Gamaliel there. Because Gamaliel might say something that would really make them unhappy, right? I think it's funny. And by the way, who was another guy that may have been in the Sanhedrin? Was at least hanging? Oh, Paul. So Paul would have been that group. And Paul was a student of Gamaliel's. Interesting. The guy that would not the man they won't speak over. They answered and said to him, if we were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up to thee. They concluded for themselves. That's what we expect in Greek, right? They concluded for themselves. And they said to him, if may, Nihilis' qualified negation, was he inwardly foul, rotten poison, inner malice flowing from a morally rotten character. This is the same accusation that Annas made, right? Or that Jesus made about Annas. That if you were, no kidding, a Pacon, right? Then show me where I am, right? Remember that? Jesus said that. He making or doing no or not a wish, a supposition to you, we would have hand him over from close behind him. Let's see. That's a little difficult until we put it in regular English. They concluded for themselves, they said to him, if it was not inwardly doing foul, we would not have given him to you. It's a wish supposition. So I told you, you can see that Pilate's answer is ambiguous. How ambiguous is theirs?
It's rude.
It is rude. It's so arrogant. We wouldn't have brought him if we hadn't already decided that he's guilty.
But look, it's in Greek, it's a wish, it's a supposition. In other words, in English, we would raise our voice at the end of the sentence, right? If he was not inwardly doing foul, we would not have given him to you, right? Just like Monty Python. That's what it means when it says a wish supposition. I add wish supposition because it's not a word in Greek. It's literally what we would do in English, like a demonstrator, raising your voice. But they have a word for it. On.
So would you take this as an answer? Is that what you're saying?
Not an answer.
It's not an answer.
Well,
Right,
how about if I
exactly.
say this? Would
Yeah.
It's answering a question with a question.
Yeah, right.
They're saying he's bad, but they haven't specified what.
They don't want to either.
Right, because there isn't one.
Well, and in reality, okay, now, in Roman law and Greek law, they don't care what you do with your slaves, per se. I mean, you can beat your slaves all you want. You can smack people around. You can do whatever. Remember, in Hebrew society, if you do a forehand, that's okay. If you do backhand or close fist, that's striking. You cannot do that even with a slave. But the Romans and Greeks didn't have that rule. So there's no way they want to go on principle. So what Pilate said, take them yourselves and judge them by your own law. But we have no right to execute anyone, they objected. Well, even the Romans and the Greeks, they didn't execute people just willy-nilly. I mean, we think that these societies were willy-nilly. The Greeks and the Romans were not willy-nilly. Now, the Hebrew society might be a little, they seem like they're high-strung, don't they?
A little volatile emotionally, whatever. I don't know. They just kind of seem to get wound up about things.
Yeah, they seem like they get wound up and then they go crazy. Luckily they have their law apparently. That's one of the things of Western civilization. We have the laws of God that come from the Hebrew, and then in Greek and Roman we have the logic and reasoning, right? And you put the law with logic and reasoning, and you get. By the way, this is another way you know that the woman caught in adultery is probably totally fabricated. Because if they really found a woman caught in adultery, what would they have done? They just would have stoned her. They wouldn't use logic and reasoning to say, let's take her to Jesus and trick him, right? They would have said, kill her. Because that's what they did to Jesus, right? Jesus said something they didn't like at the synagogue, and what did they do? That's all stone. They picked up stones. They were about ready to stone him, and he walks through them.
So it's just kind of weird to me how they say, we have no right to, have no legal right to put someone to death. Yet these other stories in the New Testament show that they tried to do it before, like they tried to stone Jesus and stuff. What were they doing? What were they thinking then?
Why is it different
A
now?
mob rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they it seems like they routinely, if the woman caught in adultery was true, like they would have, I don't know, it seems like they got away from that, so I don't really understand.
Is it because of Jesus following? Because they were worried of an uprising. If they just killed Jesus outright without, the people would rise up against them.
See, this is why I think in Centurion, I put this in the context that Pilate was really watching this stuff. So he had the Centurion. And by the way, we know that it says in John that the Roman guy with them was a leader of 1,000. So he was probably at least in the ordained. He was in the top cohort, one of the top cohort centurions. And that's what I depicted Centurion. So they couldn't get away with this, right? Pilate didn't want them to have their little thing. And I bet it happened a lot. What you guys are saying, I bet they had a lot of murder and mayhem going on in the streets because they would have something happen and they would have to go to Pilate and say, oh yeah, this baker, we think, we don't know, but he may have put some limestone in the bread, and ground it up to make his bread. And, he kind of like was killed by a mob in the street. We're sorry about it, right? Don't send your legion to, right? Because the legion was probably in the city, guarding the walls. I try to depict that in Centurion because we're living this and we're not. What are we thinking? Where do we think the legion is in this whole picture with the New Testament?
Out in the field somewhere.
Maybe on the field, maybe in the Fortress of San Antonio, right?
Right. Not amongst the people.
Yeah, but they are, right? They're not really a police force; they're a military force. But in Centurion, I had, the Centurion advised Pilate to have him use them to police. Now, the way the Romans usually did policing, right, is they're like, those guys are fighting. Take care of them. And there's no more problem, right? Or capture them. Are they Essenes? Are they carrying weapons? If you're carrying a weapon, what probably would happen to you? You end up crucified, right? But, we don't usually realize, we think there's a whole legion in the Fortress of San Antonio. It was probably 2 cohorts. Yes, sir.
Well, it seems funny, Pilate had trouble just killing him, but he didn't have any problem scourging him.
Yeah, you mean Pilate, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so Pilate scourged Jesus later in this.
I want to kill him, but I'll just whip the hell out of him.
Well, he was trying to appease the people.
Yeah, find a compromise. He doesn't have to
Is
kill
this
him,
not
but
enough?
he would satisfy the Jews to get him off his back.
Now, see, I want you to be really clear on this. I think that the Jewish people and the Jewish culture had declined so much that they were not willing and able to uphold God's law at the time. The Romans and the Greeks, look, we think that this era, and we see it depicted all the time, right? You just see somebody kill him. But the Romans and the Greeks were very cautious. And I think early cultures were very cautious about killing or harming people. And part of the huge thing about logic and reasoning that comes from the Greek and the Roman is that they would apply reasoning to their law. And their law was immutable. How immutable was their law to Socrates? Socrates killed himself in answer to the law of the Greeks, right? He was found guilty. They offered him, they said, you can exile, self-exile, just don't come back. Instead, he said, no, you pronounce me to death for, doing something against the city-state, and I will accept the punishment by my own hand if necessary. That's how powerful it was to the Greeks and the Romans. What do you think Pilate's like? Pilate would see it as an affront if he did not follow the law of the Romans, the Romans specifically, to the letter. And plus, if you remember the Archcode documents, what do they have him doing in the Archcode documents? You remember this? There is a letter from Pilate to the Senate in Rome explaining his actions with Jesus Christ. It's a really cool letter. There is also a letter from the Senate back to Pilate saying, what were you thinking? Right? Look, we think these people are working in isolation. I think they were even tighter on a tighter rope than we have any of our people.
Wasn't he under pressure for collecting taxes, doing what the Roman government wanted, and he was under someone else's thumb?
Yeah.
And if he messed up, he's going
Yeah.
to either get shut into some other horrible place, or I don't know. But right, I mean, like he was under a lot of pressure.
And he was, and his leader, and I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy who was the head of Syria was the head of all of Levant for Rome. And by the way, Pilate's next job would be that kind of job. If he didn't mess up. And we know that historically, Pilate didn't mess up. Pilate was well revered for his actions, except the Jesus Christ incident really irritated, we think, Rome a little bit, and also irritated some of the stuff going on, although we're not sure if Pilate bore the brunt of that, but he might have. We don't know historically much about Pilate after the New Testament things, but Pilate's walking a thin line here. It's really interesting. He said, certainly accordingly to them, Pilate, you take hold of him, you, and down the nomen, the law of you, separate, distinguish. That's the word, that we do judge him, they said, to him, the Judeans, to us, know or not, it is right through the figure of idea of being out in public. This is interesting. To kill outright, not one, no one, nothing. Accordingly, Pilate said to them, you take hold of it, and down to your law, you separate, you distinguish them. The Judeans blind to Judea said to him, it is not our right to kill outright no one. Double negative. That Greek double negative. It's really cool. Let's see.
The fact that he was so willing to send him over to Herod is like, oh boy, he's in Herod's territory, send him there. Pass the buck.
Yeah. And I, in Centurion, I make that Pilate, I don't think we get Herod here at all, but in that thing of saying him to Herod, Pilate was obviously a very good politician. Yeah, politician, and also using his legions, the way he did what he did. And we know that he had a very good success in Jesus' time, or Jesus would not have been able to even make the impression he did, right? Because if it were lawless, they probably would have killed Jesus right away. But instead, he was able to do his thing. We'll have to stop here, but I guess we could preempt this first thing here. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. In other words, at the hand of the Romans, right? And not other people. So anyway, we'll have to continue this next week. Thank you, Father, for your word. I pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.